So my name is Meredith Rawls, and I'm a research scientist at the University of Washington in astronomy, and I also work for Meredith Observatory. You may have noticed that there's more satellites going up recently. This is a simulation of the predicted future low Earth orbit satellites. When they come in groups, they're called constellations. These are all of the different planned and existing to start and then planned after we get past 2021 satellite constellations that are set to launch for various purposes. You've probably heard of Starlink. It provides broadband internet to various folks across the world. Amazon Kuiper is planning a similar thing. OneWeb has some satellites that have already launched, and there's a whole bunch of other private and government satellite projects that are underway. So as you can see, this is kind of a lot of satellites and fundamentally changing the low Earth orbit environment and the experience of stargazers and observers worldwide. So in a nutshell, the problem is this: there's a hugely increasing rate of these new low Earth orbit satellite constellations. As an astronomer, this directly impacts my ability to do science. And in particular, the problem is most prevalent in twilight, which is when we're doing some of the studies to find killer asteroids. And if we instead see satellites, we might not be able to find those killer asteroids, which is really a problem. The impacts are worst in astronomy for the largest wide field ground-based facilities, so big telescopes. And the problem is not just when the satellites are already up there, they actually have to launch, get up there, and then they also deorbit after a time. So you have a constant stream of a population of satellites going up and coming back down, which is not great. So there's been some teams of folks working on this problem, mostly from an astronomy perspective, but also from a space debris perspective, which I won't have much time to get into today. Some of the recommendations that we've come up with and that some of the satellite operators are already working to implement are designing satellites to be faint so that they're not leaving these bright streaks in our images so much. Keeping satellites at low altitude, which I'll talk about in a minute. Sharing the timely and accurate trajectories and positions for the satellites so that it's not like a surprise when it shows up in your image. In addition, this is a big problem in radio, which I also don't have time for, but if you think about radio frequency interference that already exists in radio astronomy, the fact that these are going to be all over the place is going to be even more of a problem for radio. So I came to this problem from the perspective of somebody working for Meredith Observatory, which is an amazing telescope under construction in Chile. It's going to provide a high-resolution color movie of the night sky over a full decade. And about every 3 days, we'll have a new image of the southern night sky. And we'll be able to make these deep images and do really amazing cosmology. We'll be able to find all kinds of new moving objects in the solar system. It's going to enable a whole bunch of science, and something like 37 billion stars and galaxies will be in the catalog after the 10 years. And I work on the software development for processing the images for this project, and it's amazing. It's also one of the most impacted facilities by these satellites. So the short version here is that if you are in charge of launching satellites for some reason, please launch fewer of them, keep them at lower altitudes, and keep them as dim as you can. It's a little counterintuitive, but higher orbits are actually worse. That's because they orbit slower and they're in sharper focus for these big mirrors on the ground, which means they linger longer on each pixel and leave a brighter streak in images. So if they're lower, they zip out of the way faster and the impact isn't necessarily as bad. Bit of a trade-off here, because if you tell everyone to have lower satellites, then they tend to want more of them to get global coverage. So nothing here is particularly easy. The bright streaks tend to not saturate our detectors, which is good, but they do have subtle effects like nonlinear crosstalk, which I'm showing here in the pink box, that can still impact science. The timescales are really mismatched as well here. The satellite companies are launching as many as fast as they can. The pace of astronomy is not quite that fast, and the pace of getting any kind of regulations started is slower still. So last year, as the SatCon1 workshop concluded that if 100,000, which is kind of what we're talking about here in the next decade, satellites are launched, no combination of mitigations can fully avoid the impacts. So we're facing an uncertain future with this number of satellites. There's an urgent need to actually, fund and address this problem, which is currently not happening. All mitigations are presently voluntary, which is not what we want for a kind of a long-term plan. The satellite operators have not apparently addressed things like what will happen if there is increased solar activity, which we know is coming on a regular cycle, and we won't know what we don't discover. These satellites will impact our ability to do science and also just observe the night sky, because the sky is part of the environment. If you are interested, this is my last slide, if you're interested in learning more about this problem, I'll leave you with these thoughts. And I would encourage you to contribute your expertise at the Dark and Quiet Skies 2 conference coming this fall in October. Thank you so much.